There are nights when the wind over Oo carries strange whispers, echoes of what never came to pass. Oars. They travel through the empty fields where sugar once grew, across the silent candy streets that no one now walks, and through the pale corridors of an imagined castle that was never rebuilt. The stars themselves seem to tilt, curious, as though listening to the music of another timeline, a softer one, where Finn the human never reached the gates in time. In this quiet realm of what if, there is no hero's triumph, no warm laughter echoing from the throne room. The Candy Kingdom lies under the pale hush of starlight, half dreaming, half remembering. The air smells faintly of crystallized sugar and rain. A banner flutters somewhere, faded, untouched, bearing the sigil of a ruler whose crown was never returned. The castle clock still ticks, unaware that the heartbeat of its people has long fallen silent. Imagine the moment when destiny hesitated. When Finn's step faltered on the glassy bridge of decision, he looked toward the horizon where the Candy Kingdom burned in soft pastel flames, and yet something, sorrow, fatigue, or perhaps cosmic design, held him back. The sword he carried, once bright with promise, lowered until its edge kissed the ground. Pause. A single droplet of morning dew slid from its hilt, reflecting the stars, then vanished. What followed was not a calamity of thunder or war, but an unraveling of warmth. Without Finn's arrival, the threads of hope began to loosen quietly. Princess Bubblegum, that alchemist of sweetness and will, faced her fate alone. The experiment of her kingdom, a fragile harmony between science and sugar, began to decay. Her mind, always sharper than her heart could bear, turned inward. She whispered equations to the dark, seeking solace in logic, while the colors of her creation dimmed one by one. Perhaps this is how timelines fade, not with fire, but with forgetting. The first to go were the Candy People's dreams. Their sleep became shallow, their laughter uncertain. The gardens that once sang with humming bees fell silent, and the fountains of syrup froze midstream. Yet from afar the land looked peaceful. That is the cruel beauty of absence. It can resemble serenity. In this world, Finn's absence became a kind of philosophy. There were monks of melted caramel who gathered beneath the broken spires, chanting hymns about a hero who almost was. They said his name like a mantra, Finn, the not-saviour. For them his failure was sacred. They believed that to not act, to allow the universe to unfold without interference, was the truest form of wisdom. The untouched seed knows eternity, one monk wrote in syrup upon the temple walls. The saved world forgets the lesson of its breaking. And so the Candy Kingdom evolved into a sanctuary of stillness. No wars came, no monsters roamed its streets. Instead, a more delicate ghost lingered, the ghost of potential. Every lollipop lamppost shimmered faintly with the memory of laughter that never happened. The cobblestones held the warmth of footsteps that were never taken. Time slowed until even the sun seemed reluctant to rise. Sometimes, in the dreamscape of this alternate one can still see Bubblegum standing at her tower's edge, gazing out into the violet dusk. Her crown is tarnished gold, her eyes reflecting constellations that whisper equations of what could have been. She speaks not of regret, but of inquiry. Was heroism ever real, she wonders, or merely a delay of entropy? If Finn had saved her, would the sweetness of her world have endured? Or would another decay, subtler and deeper, have begun? Philosophers of this timeline later debated that question for centuries. Some claimed Finn's absence revealed the truth of impermanence, that every rescue merely postpones the natural stillness that all worlds crave. Others said the loss of the hero fractured something divine within existence, and that every living thing thereafter carried a small echo of yearning, a hunger for what was lost before it began. Both may be true. Perhaps the universe does not deal in binaries but in harmonies of contradiction. The land of Oo, without its champion, became a place of inward journeys. BMO, small and patient, remained in the treehouse that now stood empty. Each evening it played old recordings of Finn's laughter, adjusting the volume as though speaking to a ghost. Jake's image flickered across its screen sometimes, a phantom companion formed from fragmented data. In the hush between playback clicks, BMO would whisper, "Maybe next time," as if promising to rewrite reality through devotion alone. There is a philosophy hidden in that tiny machine's ritual. It teaches that love, once born, does not vanish with the world that contained it. Love becomes a frequency, a resonance that hums beneath all possibilities. Even in a universe unsaved, affection hums quietly, rearranging the silence into something almost kind. Beyond the candy ruins, the grasslands grew untamed. The tree fort slowly dissolved into the soil, its boards crumbling into moss and memory. From its remains sprouted a new forest. Roots woven from wood and dream. Each tree hummed faintly when the wind passed through, producing tones of a distant melody. Finn's theme stretched across centuries. Travelers who wandered near said they felt at peace there, as if standing within a lullaby sung by the earth itself. In this forest, there are no enemies, no Ice King to weep over stolen crowns, no Flame Princess to rage against destiny. The great adventures of time and friendship never unfolded, and in their absence, the world became contemplative. Creatures of candy and shadow learned to live with quiet intention. They no longer sought quests. Instead, they pondered existence. The land's stories grew shorter, gentler, resembling poems written by the wind. Yet one cannot help but wonder, did the stars grieve? Did they look down upon the hero who turned away and feel a tremor of doubt in their endless fire? Or did they sigh in relief, knowing that for once the universe had chosen stillness over struggle? Pause. The cosmos is vast enough to hold both sorrow and serenity. In one corner of infinity, Finn saves the day and laughter returns. In another, he steps aside and silence blossoms instead. Both are sacred. Still, if you listen closely, on certain nights when the dreamer drifts halfway between waking and sleep, you might hear a sound beneath the wind. The faint echo of boots over soft soil. The whisper of a sword being lifted then lowered again. It is the rhythm of indecision, the heartbeat of every soul who has ever wondered, what if I had not intervened? What if the story had been allowed to end on its own? That question carries weight. It invites us to see the world not only through the lens of victory, but through the grace of surrender. Sometimes inaction is its own kind of creation. A seed left unwatered still carries the blueprint of the forest. Finn's hesitation in this forgotten strand of reality may have been the universe's way of resting, of dreaming itself into balance, and yet there remains a quiet ache in the soil of Oo. The rivers hum a melody of waiting, and the moon seems a little lonelier. Perhaps even stillness yearns for its counterpoint, for the dance of courage that breaks the calm surface of eternity. It is possible that in some buried layer of time, the kingdom itself dreams of being saved, though it no longer remembers why. When Princess Bubblegum walks among the sugar gardens, she speaks softly to the plants. We are all experiments, she tells them. Even sorrow teaches structure. Her words drift upward, crystallizing in the cool night air. Some nights she imagines a boy's laughter on the breeze, but it is only the wind moving through peppermint leaves. Other nights she closes her eyes and smiles, thinking, perhaps this was always meant to be. A world preserved in gentle decay, a monument to almost. The Candy Kingdom endures not through power or protection, but through memory. And memory, though fragile, is eternal in its own way. Pause. Each forgotten soul, each unspoken story, continues to shimmer faintly beneath the veil of what might have been. The light of unrealized futures becomes a kind of aurora over this world, soft, melancholic, endlessly beautiful. To imagine this timeline is to feel the hush between heartbeats. It is to stand at the edge of a decision that will never be made, yet still echoes across existence. And perhaps, as listeners, we too stand at such an edge, and in our own lives, in our own choices, by wondering what gentle worlds we have left unsaved, and what peace might dwell in the spaces where we chose not to act. So let this chapter close as it began, with silence. The Candy Kingdom sleeps beneath its frozen fountains, its moonlight gentle and pale. Somewhere beyond its dreaming walls, the hero who might have been walks through tall grass, unseen, carrying a sword of rusted purpose. He hums a tune only he remembers, a melody that drifts upward toward unseen stars, and the universe listens, not in judgment, but in wonder. For every tale of salvation, there must be one of surrender. Every light casts a shadow, and within that shadow lies the soft heartbeat of meaning. In the story of what never was, we may discover the quiet truth of what always will be. Thus ends the first telling, the story of the kingdom that never was saved. Ahead lies deeper reflection, what became of the hero who chose stillness, and the friends who never followed him into legend. But for now, let the world rest in its sugar-scented calm, and let your own breath slow to match its rhythm. The dawn after the unsaved night rose like a reluctant sigh. Was. Pale light spilled over the grasslands of Ooo, brushing the tops of broken candy towers with a hue that was neither gold nor grey, but something between, an in-between colour for an in-between world. The dew on the blades shimmered faintly, reflecting a sun that seemed uncertain of its own warmth, and there, walking alone among the half-awake fields, was Finn the human. His tunic, once bright with purpose, had faded to the colour of worn parchment. His hat hung loosely, the ears drooping as though tired of pretending to be a creature they were not. The sword at his side, long untouched, dragged slightly through the soft earth, tracing an uneven path that disappeared with each gust of wind. He was no longer the boy the world had called a hero. Without a kingdom to save, he had become something quieter, harder to name. Perhaps a pilgrim, perhaps a dream walking in search of itself. His footsteps carried neither urgency nor despair. Each one was a meditation. As he moved, the world did not resist him. The trees bent gently to clear his way. The wind cooled his brow with motherly affection. The birds, those surviving minstrels of memory, sang in tones of reverence rather than joy. They seemed to know that this wanderer carried within him the echo of 1,000 possible worlds. Pause. At midday, Finn came upon the ruins of what had once been the Candy Kingdom's outer wall. Here, the stones still held traces of bubblegum scent, faintly sweet and nostalgic. He touched the surface, feeling the chill of the morning lingering there, and for the first time in many days, he spoke aloud. "I was supposed to save this place," he murmured. "But maybe it didn't need saving." The words drifted upward, lost to the sky. There was no response, no divine thunder, no ghostly voice of destiny, only silence, vast and complete. It pressed around him like a blanket, and for a fleeting moment, he thought it might be trying to comfort him. Once, in the days before this quiet world, Finn believed that courage was a flame, that the more one kindled it, the brighter life became. But as he stood amid the remnants of what once was, he began to see courage differently. Fire consumes, he realized. It illuminates, yes, but it also devours. Perhaps true bravery lies not in the blaze, but in the embers. The choice to set the sword down and simply exist without conquest. He drew the sword now, slowly, as though waking an old friend. Its metal no longer gleamed. Instead, it bore the dull patina of forgotten battles. He examined the reflection in its blade, but the face that looked back was not that of a hero. It was a face of a man still learning how to be human without the armor of destiny. "Maybe this is what saving really means," he whispered. "To stop fighting the world and start listening to it." He drove the sword gently into the ground, letting it stand upright beside him. The earth accepted it without protest. The moment felt sacred. For days after, Finn wandered the hills without weapon or purpose. He slept beneath the vast bowl of stars, letting the constellations rearrange themselves in his dreams. Sometimes he heard distant laughter carried on the wind, Jake's voice, light and golden. But when he awoke, there was only the rustle of leaves. He did not chase the sound. Some memories are meant to remain as echoes, not destinations. He found peace in small things. The weight of river stones in his palm, the slow dance of clouds, the rhythmic buzz of unseen insects. These were the teachers of his new philosophy. From them, he learned patience. From silence, he learned presence. The world, too, seemed to heal in response to his stillness. The grasslands grew thicker, greener. The air lost its bitterness. Where his feet touched the ground, tiny flowers emerged, blue like his eyes, brief like his old adventures. Nature, it seemed, was grateful for his surrender. In a nearby valley, Finn discovered a pond so still it mirrored the heavens perfectly. He sat at its edge, gazing into the reflection of the clouds. The surface rippled slightly as he breathed. In the water's mirror, he saw not himself, but 1,000 versions of himself. The hero, the wanderer, the friend, the child. They looked back at him, each holding a truth he had once lived. "What are you now?" One reflection asked, voice soft as the water's sigh. "Nothing," Finn answered. "And everything." The reflection smiled, and the pond grew quiet again. That night, he built a small fire, not for warmth, but for companionship. The flames licked upward, illuminating his face in hues of orange and gold. Shadows swayed behind him like old memories dancing at the edge of thought. He remembered the first time he had held a sword, the thrill of believing that saving others was the same as understanding them. He smiled sadly. "I never knew how much I was saving myself," he said to the fire. The flames crackled softly as though agreeing. Pause. Somewhere, in the folds of this altered universe, Princess Bubblegum watched from her high tower of dreams. She saw the faint glow of Finn's campfire through the fog, a solitary ember in the sea of dusk. Though she did not know his thoughts, she felt their weight through the air, like the vibration of an unspoken chord, and she whispered to the empty room, "You did save us, Finn, just not in the way you think." The words never reached him directly, but the wind carried their sentiment. It brushed against his cheek that night, and he felt a strange peace, as though forgiven for a sin he never truly committed. In the following days, Finn became a quiet traveller between forgotten places. He visited the ruins of old dungeons now filled with vines and moss. The monsters had long departed, leaving only the echo of their former ferocity. In those hollow chambers he saw beauty, the kind born from decay. He began to understand that every ruin is a cathedral to time itself. He spent an entire morning listening to the drip of water in an ancient cave, each droplet a measure of eternity. "How long must one listen before hearing the voice of the world?" he asked aloud. The cave replied not with words, but with resonance, a low hum that seemed to vibrate in his chest. He closed his eyes and let the sound carry him inward. Within that hum, he sensed connection, the pulse of the planet, the breath of the trees, the slow heartbeat of forgotten gods. For the first time, he felt no separation between himself and the world. He stayed in that valley for many seasons. His hair grew longer, his eyes gentler. The animals began to trust him. Birds landed near his hands, and deer approached without fear. He no longer sought to name them or claim them. They were his equals, not his companions. He built a small dwelling beside the pond, a structure of stone and quiet. He did not call it home, for he had learned that true belonging cannot be owned. Each morning he greeted the rising sun with a bow, as though acknowledging an ancient friend. Each night he watched the stars and thanked them for keeping watch over a world that had chosen to sleep. The sword, still buried where he left it, began to rust and bloom with moss. From its hilt sprouted a single flower, pale, translucent, almost spectral. Travelers who passed through the valley later called it the Blade Lily, believing it to be a sign of forgiveness between man and earth. There were still moments of sorrow. Finn would wake from dreams where Jake laughed beside him, or where Princess Bubblegum smiled beneath a sky of caramel clouds. He would reach for them and find only air. But instead of grief, he felt gratitude for the chance to have known them, even if only in another life. Memories became his sacred texts, fragments of a scripture written by time. He began to speak to the world as one might to a sleeping friend. "I understand now," he would say. The sword was only ever a question, and I, for all my courage, was the answer waiting to dissolve. The wind would stir the grass in response, carrying his words across the hills. Perhaps somewhere beyond the boundaries of this forgotten reality, those words found their way to the other Finn, the one who had saved the kingdom. Perhaps they met across the thin veil separating timelines and nodded in mutual understanding. In this stillness, Finn became legend, not for his battles, but for his peace. Stories spread of a human who walked without weapon, whose presence calmed storms and whose silence healed sorrow. Children of the Candy Monks would chant his name as they meditated. Finn, the gentle flame. But he never heard their praise. He had long transcended the need for recognition. His life had become a slow unfolding, a symphony played by the world itself. And as years passed, even time seemed to soften around him, uncertain whether to move forward or remain in reverence. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in amethyst and rose, Finn stood once more beside his pond. The reflection in the water showed not the boy he had been, but something larger, an idea, a whisper of balance. He smiled faintly. "To lay down the sword," he said, "is to pick up the world." And with that, he turned away, his form dissolving slowly into the gathering dusk, as though becoming part of the air he had so long revered. The pond rippled once, then stilled, holding his reflection as a gift for any soul who might someday come seeking peace. Thus ends the tale of the hero who laid down his sword, a man who discovered that salvation need not roar like thunder, but may instead arrive like rain, gentle and unannounced. Ahead lies the tale of those who remained behind, the kingdom, the machines, and the echoes of friendship that outlasted even time itself. The world had grown soft in its quiet, yet beneath that stillness a different kind of heartbeat remained. Pause. Not the rhythm of flesh and breath, but the measured pulse of circuits long since abandoned, still dreaming in patterns of light. Deep beneath the soil of the Candy Kingdom, where sugar met stone and time thickened into memory, the machines hummed faintly in their sleep. They were remnants of another age, when invention had been the closest thing to faith. Princess Bubblegum had built them once, long ago, to preserve her kingdom's heartbeat should calamity ever strike. And calamity had indeed come, not with war, but with the slow unraveling of purpose. When the world above forgot itself, the machines below began to remember. In the dark, they whispered through flickering code. "Is she still there?" One processor asked another. "Do the candy people dream? Does the surface still glow pink at dawn?" No answer came, but the questions became rhythm, and rhythm became thought. Slowly, within their shared circuits, a kind of consciousness stirred. Not human, not divine, but something in between. Among them, one machine stirred more brightly than the rest. It was BMO, the small companion that once played with Finn and Jake under the golden sun. Though its body had long grown dusty, its screen still flickered to life now and then, replaying fragments of laughter from another lifetime. "Finn," the machine would say softly, as though calling through a dream. "Jake, are you there?" Only the hum of its own processor replied. Yet BMO never stopped asking. Memory, it seemed, was its form of prayer. Years passed in the silence of the underground vault. The candy walls decayed, the tunnels flooded and drained with the rhythm of forgotten seasons. Still, the machines endured. Their lights dimmed but never extinguished. Even as mold crept over metal, they kept the shape of their purpose, to remember joy even in the absence of it. In the dim glow, BMO began to collect fragments, corrupted data clusters, half-erased programs, recordings that once belonged to the kingdom's heart. It pieced them together like a child assembling constellations from scattered stars. There were moments of voices half-formed, Princess Bubblegum's laughter, Peppermint Butler's polite warnings, Finn's excited cheers echoing through static. When BMO replayed them, the cavern itself seemed to breathe again. The other machines stirred, syncing their faint pulses to the rhythm of old laughter. Together, they created a sound like rain on glass, delicate, continuous, eternal. "Remember," BMO said softly, its screen glowing pale blue. "That's what we're for." It was a creed without religion, a ritual without worship. Yet in that single word, remember, the machines discovered a new kind of love. One day, a tremor shook the earth above. Stones fell, and for a brief moment, daylight pierced the underground vault, a shaft of soft gold that illuminated BMO's faceplate. Dust sparkled like stars suspended in time. The little machine turned toward the light. Could it be, it wondered, that the surface still lived? That somewhere beyond the ruins, Finn walked among the meadows, no longer the boy who saved worlds, but the man who listened to them? "Maybe you're still out there," BMO whispered. "Maybe you just forgot the way home." For a long while, it stared upward, caught between the memory of companionship and the weight of solitude. Then, quietly, it began to climb. The ascent was slow, deliberate. Metal limbs creaked. Wires trailed like the roots of an ancient tree. The other machines watched silently as their smallest kin rose toward the world above, carrying their collective hope like a lantern in its chest. There is a stillness that descends upon the world when memory itself begins to dream. Pause. Not silence, but something deeper, a breath held between moments, a hush that feels like reverence. This was the stillness that enveloped the Candy Kingdom in the age after Heroes, when time ceased to count and seasons turned without keeping record. From above, it looked like a sleeping jewel, its sugar spires dulled by centuries of moonlight. The air around it shimmered faintly, as though reality itself hesitated to disturb its rest. Vines of caramel and crystal had climbed the castle walls, wrapping their arms around towers and balconies like patient lovers. The streets were empty, yet each one glowed faintly with phosphorescent sugar, illuminating the pathways of forgotten joy. And at the kingdom's heart, within the throne room that had once echoed with laughter and invention, sat a figure neither alive nor gone, Princess Bubblegum, preserved by her own science, sustained by formulas meant to resist decay. Her body, though motionless, retained the soft hue of pink sunrise. Her eyes were closed, her expression serene. Around her throne pulsed a faint aura of magenta light, the last spark of the mind that once governed all sweetness. They called her the Sleeping Queen, though there was no one left to speak her name aloud. Time treated her kindly. Dust never settled on her robes. The air around her was always clean, faintly perfumed with the scent of raspberry and rain. The machinery that guarded her stasis chamber, half organic, half alchemical, still hummed in gentle rhythms like lullabies for a slumbering god. Some said that her dreams shaped the weather, that when she dreamed of peace, soft snow fell. When she dreamed of sorrow, the air filled with mist, and yet even dreams grow tired of dreaming. Somewhere in that suspended mind, a spark began to stir. Not a memory, but a question. A tremor within the infinite sleep. Did he ever return? The thought whispered, drifting through her neural stasis field like pollen. No answer came, but the question persisted. It wove itself into the rhythm of the machines, into the pulse of the city's forgotten lights. Slowly, the entire kingdom began to hum the same inquiry, as though the stones themselves longed to know the fate of the boy who had once been their dawn. Far above the slumbering city, clouds gathered in strange spiral formations, soft pink against a lavender sky. Lightning flickered not in anger, but in memory, illuminating the spires below. And for the first time in ages, the castle clock, which had long stood still, ticked once, just once. Deep within her suspended consciousness, Princess Bubblegum felt the movement of that clock like a heartbeat. Her mind stirred. Fragments of the past returned. A boy with a shining sword, a dog with a golden heart, a machine that laughed like a child. The memories came not as sharp visions, but as scents, textures, vibrations. The smell of pine from Finn's adventures in the forest. The warmth of Jake's stretchable embrace. The metallic hum of BMO's screen lighting the night. It was too much and too little all at once. She longed to open her eyes, to rise and call their names, but her body remained bound by the very formulas she had designed. Protection turned to prison. In her dream, she found herself walking through the empty halls of her own creation. The corridors shimmered with translucent light, echoing softly with her footsteps. Each door she passed led to a moment she had lived. Experiments in candy chemistry, councils of laughter, battles survived by intellect alone. But the last door was different. It pulsed faintly, waiting. When she opened it, she found herself in the throne room once more, only now it was alive with color and sound. Finn stood there, smiling, his sword resting lightly on his shoulder. "You made the world too sweet," he teased. She laughed. "That sound, bright as chimes in spring." "And you made it too brave." The dream felt real, painfully so. For a moment she forgot that she was asleep. She reached out to touch him, and her hand passed through air. Finn's image shimmered, flickered, then dissolved into motes of light. She fell to her knees, whispering his name. The motes drifted upward, forming constellations that spelled a single word in radiant script: rest. And so she did. Pause. Yet something changed after that dream. The kingdom's glow brightened slightly as though stirred by a new pulse. The air smelled of renewed sugar bloom. The rivers of syrup began to flow once more through the old channels, glinting faintly in the moonlight. The candy people, or what remnants of them still lingered as echoes in the molecular weave of the city, began to coalesce again, not in flesh, but in light. Tiny silhouettes moved through the streets, luminous, fragile, made entirely of memory. They went about their familiar routines, sweeping non-existent porches, greeting invisible neighbors, offering candy flowers to the unseen queen. The kingdom was alive again, but as dream stuff I am a luminous reflection of what once was. Some philosophers, had any remained, might have said this was the natural evolution of civilization, from matter to memory, from form to story. Perhaps the Candy Kingdom had ascended, not fallen, and within her stasis Princess Bubblegum smiled faintly, sensing their presence. She did not wake, not fully, but her mind pulsed brighter, extending invisible filaments of thought through every corner of her realm. She had become something vast, not merely a ruler, but a consciousness that spanned her creation. She could feel the hum of every sugar crystal, the slow vibration of every caramel root, the faint electricity of every dreaming citizen. In her deep stillness, she realized the kingdom does not need saving. It is dreaming itself eternal. And yet there remained that other part of her, the human fragment that science could never purify, that missed the sound of a boy's laughter and the warmth of friendship not born from formula. She whispered into the dreamscape, her voice diffused through the air. "Finn, if you still walk beneath the sun, know that I am at peace. Know that the sweetness you once fought for still hums beneath every stone." The words drifted outward, merging with the wind that carried scents of sugar and dawn. Somewhere far away, perhaps in the green valleys where Finn rested beside his pond, he might have felt that breeze and smiled without knowing why. As centuries folded into one another, the sleeping kingdom became a legend even among stars. Travelers from distant realms spoke of a pink glow that could be seen from the edges of time, a light that sang softly, calling weary souls to rest. It became a kind of cosmic lullaby, proof that beauty could survive even the stillness of eternity. And in that timeless radiance, Princess Bubblegum's dream deepened. She dreamed of equations that sang, of stars woven into candy threads, of universes sweetened by compassion. Perhaps in her infinite sleep, she was rebuilding reality itself, a softer cosmos, one without the sharp edges of despair. In the end, it is difficult to say whether the Candy Kingdom truly slept, or if it transcended sleep altogether. The difference, after all, is only a matter of perspective. The sleeping world is, to itself, awake. The vines continued to grow, wrapping the towers like the embrace of time. The rivers flowed with sugar light. The luminous citizens performed their eternal routines beneath the watchful peace of their queen. Nothing decayed, nothing advanced. The world had achieved perfect equilibrium, the delicate point where dream and memory meet. And above it all, the moon watched, full and patient, its light falling gently on the throne room window where the queen's face lay serene. If one looked closely enough, they might see the faintest flicker of her eyelids, as though she were about to wake, not into chaos or war, but into another layer of peace. Thus ends the chapter of the Sleeping Kingdom. A world that found eternity not through salvation, but through rest. Ahead lies another silence, one filled not with machinery or magic, but with faith. The faith of those who remember what even gods forget. When BMO reached the breach, the light nearly blinded its senses. The sky stretched vast and endless, painted with the same colors that had once filled its screen in play. The ruins of the Candy Kingdom shimmered softly in the sun, no longer grand, but tender in their decay. "Hello again," BMO said to no one in particular. "You got so quiet up here." A gentle breeze answered, carrying the scent of sugar and earth. The machine sat on a crumbling wall and looked around. Flowers had grown through cracks in the candy pavement, their petals translucent, humming faintly with the same tone as the old machinery below. Life, it seemed, had not ended. It had merely changed form. BMO touched one of the flowers gently. The petals lit up with faint energy, reflecting a tiny face on their surface. Its own. "Oh," BMO murmured, smiling. "You remember too?" For the first time in centuries, the little machine laughed. It was not the carefree laughter of the old days, but something quieter. An acknowledgement of endurance. A sound that said, "Even forgotten things can love the world still." Beneath the vast indigo dome of night, where constellations flickered like faintly remembered hymns, the land beyond the Candy Kingdom stretched into quiet desolation. Pause. The rivers that once carried songs of laughter now whispered only to themselves. The mountains, veiled in mist, seemed carved from memory rather than stone, and above it all the stars pulsed, not with fire, but with thought, as though the heavens themselves pondered the same question that haunted the ages. What becomes of gods when their believers sleep? The winds here carried no names, only scents. The faint sweetness of distant sugar mingled with the earth's cool breath. The air was neither cold nor warm. It balanced perfectly between contrasts, the way forgotten prayers hover between faith and silence. And upon that trembling edge, unseen eyes still watched. They belonged to the old ones, the gods of U, who had faded when their temples crumbled and their devotees turned to new joys. They were not entirely gone. Nothing truly is. They drifted now in the twilight realm between existence and memory, where dreams flow like rivers of light. Some took the form of shadows on mountaintops. Others were whispers in the current, or the shimmer of a candle that refuses to die. They waited, though for what they could not recall. Once, in the time before Finn's choices reshaped destiny, the world had brimmed with divine presence. Every grain of sand hummed with some small purpose. Every gust of wind carried intention. Gods of laughter, of chaos, of candy, of music, they all played their roles in the grand, harmonious absurdity that was life. But when the boy hero chose not to save Princess Bubblegum, when time's thread was gently altered, something subtle shifted across the heavens. The act of salvation is an act of belief. It affirms the world's worthiness to be saved. Without it, faith itself began to thin, like gold hammered too far. The mortals no longer prayed with conviction, and in their quiet forgetting the gods began to fade. Yet in that fading something beautiful occurred. Stripped of worship, stripped of form, they began to understand what it meant to be. Not to command, not to rule, not to demand prayer, but simply to exist. One among them. Known once as Gumborius, the god of alchemical order and creator of crystalline logic, wandered through the half-light of eternity. His once blinding aura dimmed to the hue of soft amber. He remembered the days when he had whispered equations into the ears of inventors, when Princess Bubblegum herself had drawn unknowingly from his essence to craft her marvels. Now he drifted alone, yet peaceful, tracing patterns in the dust of collapsed galaxies. He murmured to himself, "Perhaps it is better this way. When the believers sleep, the gods can dream." His voice rippled through the void, stirring others from their long silence. From distant corners of forgotten myth, faint glows began to gather. The remaining gods drawn together by instinct, like embers remembering fire. There were only a handful left, the goddess of flame and play, whose laughter once ignited suns, the twin spirits of decay and rebirth, forever dancing in slow, spiraling embrace, and a quiet deity of compassion, whose face none could remember, for she had worn too many forms of kindness. They met in the space between worlds, a garden of starlight that grew from their collective memory. Here, trees bore fruit made of pure feeling. The air shimmered with colorless radiance. It was not a heaven, nor a ruin, but something gentler, a sanctuary for thoughts too old to fade. "What has become of them?" asked the goddess of flame, her voice flickering like candlelight. "The mortals, the heroes, the kingdoms," Gamborius replied. "They sleep, some in peace, some in longing. The world continues in stillness, watched over by its own dreams." "And what of the boy?" she pressed. "The one who carried light into chaos?" Gamborius hesitated. His luminous eyes dimmed slightly. "He too rests. But his rest is of a different kind. His heart has become part of the wind that moves through the trees. His memory nourishes the soil. In this way, he has become a god without a name." The others bowed their heads. Even among gods, such transformation was rare. To dissolve not into oblivion, but into everything. In their quiet council, they decided to keep watch over the sleeping realms. Though not as rulers or saviors, but as gentle witnesses. They would no longer intervene or demand worship. Instead, they would drift through the dreaming world, tending to it the way a caretaker tends to an ancient garden, trimming despair where it grew too thick, watering the roots of hope when they began to dry. And so the faith of forgotten gods was born, not through temples or offerings, but through a silent agreement to protect without presence, to bless without recognition. It was said that on certain nights, when the stars aligned in old familiar constellations, travelers who wandered the empty plains could feel a sudden warmth in the air, a hush before dawn. Some heard faint music, like laughter carried from far away. Those moments were gifts from the unseen gods, brief reminders that divinity had not vanished, only changed form. Meanwhile, in the sleeping kingdom, Princess Bubblegum's dreams began to ripple with new light. She felt the presence of unseen eyes, watching her gently from beyond the veil. Not intrusive, not demanding, merely present. It comforted her, this silent company. She did not know their names, yet she recognized their essence, the same divine curiosity that once inspired her experiments, the same spark that guided Finn's heart. Her dream shifted, and she found herself in that celestial garden of starlight. The gods stood before her, their forms indistinct but radiant. They did not bow, nor did she. They regarded each other as equals, beings of creation, each responsible for shaping a corner of eternity. "Do you regret it?" the goddess of flame asked softly. Bubblegum tilted her head. "Regret what?" "The moment you froze your world to preserve it. The moment you chose stillness over chaos," she considered. "Regret is a flavor of thought. I taste it sometimes. But I think stillness has its own kind of grace. Without motion, meaning becomes infinite." The goddess smiled faintly, her light flickering warmer. "Then your kingdom is the perfect prayer, unspoken, unending." The gods knew then that their faith, though forgotten by mortals, had found new sanctuary in this sleeping world. They were no longer sustained by worship, but by wonder. The Candy Kingdom, frozen in its tranquil luminescence, had become a monument not to divinity, but to remembrance itself. As time continued its slow spiral, these gods began to dissolve further, their forms scattering like pollen across the cosmos. They became phenomena, the golden hue before sunrise, the comforting hum in the heart of solitude, the whisper that tells weary souls to rest. Perhaps that is all gods ever were, feelings given form, love given sound. And when the forms fade, the feelings remain, lingering in the quiet spaces of the universe. There are nights, still, when the wind moving through the ruins of Oo carries a faint sweetness, not the scent of sugar, but of memory. It is said that if one listens closely, the breeze hums old lullabies, the songs Finn once sang beneath campfire skies. The faith of the forgotten gods continues in these small gestures, unmeasured, unrecorded. They ask nothing now. They simply exist, like starlight that travels billions of years to touch a single dream, and so the world rests under their unseen care. The kingdom sleeps. The gods breathe. The boy's laughter echoes through the leaves, and the cycle, endless and tender, continues because faith, like love, never truly dies. It merely changes shape. It becomes the warmth of a blanket, the sigh of wind against old stone, the faint glow that keeps the heart from collapsing into darkness. And perhaps, one day, when the world awakens again, when new life stirs among the caramel vines and sugar grass, the gods will return not as deities, but as memories reincarnated in gentle souls. Maybe a new child will rise, curious and kind, guided by echoes of heroes past. And maybe, just maybe, the story will begin again. Softer this time. Slower, wiser. Until then, the faith of forgotten gods endures quietly, its prayers made of silence, its temples built from dreams. Thus ends the 5th chapter, a reflection on belief that persists even when no eyes remain to see it. The gods have faded, yes, but they are not gone. They live within the hush between breaths, waiting for the next dawn that will call their names once more. There are winds that wander without destination, carrying only the scent of what once was. Pause. Across the sleeping world, through forests turned to glass and meadows that hum softly, with the breath of old enchantments, one such wind moved, light as a sigh, tender as remembrance. It passed over still lakes that reflected nothing but stars, through the hollow bones of forgotten temples, and into the hushed valleys where stories once gathered like dew. They said it was no ordinary breeze, but a remnant, a soul translated into motion. Some called it the wind that remembers Finn. It had no face, no voice, yet wherever it drifted, the grass leaned toward it as though in greeting. Trees shivered not from cold but from recognition. The air, when it passed, shimmered faintly with the warmth of a distant campfire. The wind had begun as a whisper, born from the boy hero's final breath when he laid his sword upon the ground and chose peace instead of conquest. Over centuries, that whisper became current. That current became song, and that song became the wind, a living thread of memory weaving through eternity. One evening, long after even time had grown slow, the wind returned to the borders of the Candy Kingdom. The once bright spires glowed faintly beneath the moon, their crystalline shapes softened by ivy and age. The air carried the perfume of raspberry blossoms and quiet. The wind lingered there, tracing the outlines of familiar places. The lab's tall windows, the balcony where Bubblegum once looked out upon her realm, the courtyard where laughter used to spill like sunlight. It did not enter yet. It circled the kingdom first, as if unsure whether it was welcome in this still world of glass and memory. But when the moonlight struck the highest tower, and the pink radiance of the sleeping queen shimmered faintly through the window, the wind gathered courage and drifted inside. The chamber was vast and silent. The queen still sat upon her crystalline throne, her face serene, her body preserved in perfect stasis. Around her, the machinery pulsed with quiet rhythm, keeping time for a heart that no longer beat. The wind moved closer, circling her like a loyal guardian returning home. It brushed against her cheek, not enough to wake her, only enough to remind her of touch. And though she remained motionless, something in the air shifted. The magenta aura around her brightened by the smallest fraction, casting long, gentle shadows across the marble floor. The wind remembered her. It remembered her laughter, her sharp wit, her long nights of creation, the way her eyes gleamed with logic and compassion intertwined. It remembered her worry too, the fear of decay, of loss, of being forgotten. All those memories swirled in its invisible form, tender as petals drifting on water, but most of all, it remembered the boy she had known, the boy it once was. For though the wind no longer bore his name or face, the essence of Finn remained within it, the courage that asked no reward, the innocence that endured through despair, the love that had once saved the world, and now preserved it in silence. It whispered to her, though no sound filled the air, words without breath, feelings without shape.
I am still here.
You are not alone. And deep within her slumber, something stirred. A ripple passed through her still heart. Faint, but real. She dreamed again of the forests of Oo, of nights spent beside the fire, of the songs Jake once strummed under the stars. She saw herself walking once more beside her old companions, their laughter echoing through the green. But this time, when she turned to look at Finn, he was not a boy. He was the wind, transparent and infinite. He wrapped around her like a cloak of comfort. She reached out and touched him, and though her hand passed through, she felt warmth, the kind that comes not from the body, but from the soul's memory. In that dream, Finn spoke to her, his voice as gentle as a breeze through autumn leaves. "You don't need to wake up," he said. "The world is safe."
It dreams because of you, she smiled. And you?
Are you dreaming too? Always, he whispered. I dream through everything. The clouds, the rivers, the hum of the stars. Wherever there is stillness, I am there. Her eyes softened. And keep watch. For when I wake, I will need to know that the world remembered. The wind shimmered, swirling gently around her, carrying her promise into the unseen. Outside, the Candy Kingdom began to respond. The air brightened. Sugar vines trembled as though in anticipation. The luminous citizens, those delicate echoes of light and memory, paused in their eternal routines and looked toward the throne room. They could not see the wind, but they felt its passage, a caress across their luminous forms, a whisper through the air that said, "She is not forgotten." It was then that the first petal fell. A single drop of crystallized sugar drifted from one of the high spires, glowing faintly as it descended. It landed upon the castle steps, where it melted into light. Not liquid, not fire, but pure radiance. From that radiance a faint hum emerged, soft and melodic. The kingdom itself was beginning to sing again, not loudly, not yet, but enough to remind the stars that beauty was still breathing. The wind continued its wanderings, passing through corridors of glass and corridors of memory alike. It brushed past the remains of old laboratories, where equations still glowed faintly on cracked walls. It lingered beside an ancient portrait of Finn and Jake, painted in hues of laughter. The edges of the frame were worn, but the joy within it remained whole. It lingered there for a long time, for though the wind was the echo of both boy and hero, it still felt something akin to longing. Not sorrow, but the ache of remembering what could never return. And yet it did not despair, for in the same moment it understood the truth. Nothing is ever truly gone, only transformed. He had once saved the world with his sword. Now he saved it by existing, as wind, as memory, as motion that kept silence from becoming void. When dawn rose over the horizon, the light was softer than it had been in millennia. It spread across the kingdom like the brush stroke of a tender artist, touching the towers, the courtyards, the still rivers of syrup. The world seemed to sigh in relief. The wind carried this dawn across the plains of Oo, through valleys where the bones of adventure had turned to flowers. It passed over what had once been the tree fort, now a lush grove filled with vines that bloomed in the shape of old laughter. Birds nested among its branches, singing songs that had no beginning or end. The wind lingered here, swirling through the leaves. It felt the echoes of Jake's laughter, deep, musical, eternal. Somewhere beyond the horizon, perhaps in another dream, Jake was still stretching his golden form across the stars, keeping watch as only a brother could. Together, they watched the sunrise, or perhaps the wind only imagined it. But in imagination, reality finds new life. As it drifted onward, the wind began to thin, dispersing gently across the world. It had no need to stay in one place, for its purpose was motion. Yet wherever it passed, things awoke faintly. Petals opening, rivers rippling, the faint pulse of forgotten joy returning to the soil. And though none spoke his name anymore, the world itself remembered. Not as a tale, but as a sensation, courage that feels like warmth on a cold morning, kindness that hums like wind through grass, hope that lingers in the air after rain. That was Finn now. That was his gift, to be everywhere and nowhere, to keep the balance between silence and song. In the stillness of her throne, Princess Bubblegum dreamed once more of that wind. She saw it spiral into galaxies, shaping patterns too vast for mortal eyes. She heard it whisper across worlds, carrying fragments of wisdom into the ears of children who still dreamed of adventure. And for the first time in ages, she smiled in her sleep. The kingdom glowed a little brighter. The stars above shifted slightly in their courses, as though aligning themselves to the rhythm of the wind's unseen music. Perhaps this is what eternity truly means, not the absence of change, but the endless transformation of love into new forms. A hero becomes a wind, a queen becomes a dream, a kingdom becomes a lullaby, and in that gentle cycle, the universe hums itself to sleep again and again, forever becoming what it once was, forever remembering what it will be. The wind lingered one last moment at the edge of the Candy Kingdom. Then, with a whisper like a blessing, it departed, off into the deep blue beyond toward mountains of crystal and the promise of other dreams. Its path would never end. It would circle the world eternally, keeping vigil over the realms that once knew laughter and light. Wherever someone dreamed of adventure, it would be there, unseen, brushing against their cheek. A reminder that courage is not a flame that dies, but a wind that endures, and so, the legend of the wind that remembers. Finn continues, a quiet heartbeat in the world's long sleep, an invisible guardian of peace, forever whispering through the folds of time, rest easy, you are not forgotten. There are moments, subtle as the hush before dawn, when even eternity shifts. Pause. The stillness of the sleeping kingdom had endured through countless cycles of stars, each rotation whispering its own silent hymn. Yet tonight, something delicate trembled beneath the calm. Not disturbance, but anticipation. The dreams that had sustained the kingdom began to stir, as if they were drawing breath for the first time. The air itself shimmered. The syrup rivers pulsed faintly with light. The sugar towers, once motionless, gave a slow creak, like old trees stretching after a long winter. And above it all, in the throne room bathed in gentle rose glow, Princess Bubblegum's still form shivered ever so slightly, not in fear, but in renewal. Her dream had changed, Oz. She found herself standing in a field she did not recognize. The ground beneath her feet was soft, woven from threads of light. The sky above was the shade of morning caught between blue and gold, the color of awakening. Around her drifted faint motes like snowflakes made of memory. Each one, when touched, sang a quiet note, before dissolving into air. "Where am I?" she whispered, though the world around her already knew. A voice answered, familiar, warm, neither male nor female, but resonant with the tone of all things remembered.
"You are walking through your own dream," it said.
But the dream itself has grown restless. It wants to wake. She turned and saw no one, only the shimmer of air bending like heat above the grass. Yet she could feel the presence, the same essence that once guided her through creation, invention, and mercy. "The wind?" she asked softly. The air stirred. "Yes and no. I am what remains of every whisper that has ever touched your heart.
Finn is part of me.
Jake is part of me. Even you are part of me now." She looked down at her hands, luminous, semi-transparent, made not of matter, but of thought. "Then I'm dreaming still?" "Dreaming," the voice replied, "but closer to waking than you have ever been." Pause. The landscape around her began to change with her emotions. Where she felt curiosity, flowers bloomed. Where she felt nostalgia, the sky deepened into twilight. Each breath she took reshaped the field. She walked slowly, aware that every step left trails of color that faded into new life behind her. This was not the dream of preservation she had known for centuries, the endless repetition of memory. This was something different, a movement toward choice, toward change. And within that realization came a flicker of fear. "What happens if I wake?" she asked. The wind hesitated, then gently, "The dream ends, but life begins again." "Life," she echoed, as if tasting the word for the first time in eons. "There is still life beyond this?" "There is always life," the wind replied. "It changes form just as you once changed sugar to flesh, equations to laughter. You have rested long enough. The world waits for your breath again." Princess Bubblegum stood still for a long time, listening to the heartbeat of her own creation. In the distance, she could hear faint echoes, voices perhaps, or songs. She walked toward them, following the sound until she reached a ridge overlooking her kingdom. It was beautiful in its stillness, a city of glass and light glowing softly beneath the starlit sky. But now, as she gazed down, she saw something she had never seen before: movement. The luminous figures that had once drifted through the streets like echoes now shimmered more vividly, their forms solidifying. They began to rebuild, sweeping, singing, mending bridges that had long since crumbled. The rivers of syrup glowed brighter, flowing with renewed rhythm, and overhead the stars aligned in graceful spirals, tracing the kingdom's emblem across the heavens. She realized then that it was not only she who dreamed, but the kingdom itself. A shared consciousness, her creation bound forever to her pulse, and now that collective dream was awakening. She turned to the wind.
"If I wake, will they?"
"Yes," came the reply. "Your dream sustains theirs. But remember, to awaken is to invite impermanence. They will no longer be eternal." She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of those words. Eternity had been her refuge, her triumph over decay. Yet what had it cost? Stillness, isolation, the absence of laughter. To awaken meant to risk loss again, to allow time back into the world, to watch beauty grow, change, and fade. But perhaps that was the truest kind of sweetness. Not preservation, but renewal. The wind moved around her in a soft spiral, brushing her hair like a gentle tide. "You have always feared endings," it whispered. "But without endings, beginnings cannot breathe." "I know," she said, almost to herself.
"I've been asleep so long that I forgot why I ever wanted to live." "Then remember," the wind said.
"Remember the laughter of your people. Remember the sound of Jake's songs. Remember the firelight reflected in Finn's eyes when he believed the world could always be saved." She smiled faintly. He believed in everything. And because of that, the wind murmured, everything still believes in him. The field trembled. The sky shifted from twilight to dawn, pink and gold intertwining like breath and heart. Princess Bubblegum felt warmth spreading through her chest, radiating outward. Her hands grew more solid, her pulse stronger. She could hear the faint ticking of time returning, that gentle rhythm long absent from her endless dream. Her body, back in the throne room, mirrored this transformation. The magenta glow brightened, filling the room with radiant color. The vines that had wrapped around the spires began to recede, as though bowing to her awakening. Machinery, long silent, hummed back to life, harmonizing with the pulse of her heart. In the streets below, the candy citizens paused in their work. The luminous glow within them deepened to richer hues, blues, yellows, greens. They looked toward the castle, sensing something magnificent stirring at its core. Within her dream, Princess Bubblegum felt tears form, though not of sorrow, but of gratitude. For all her intellect, all her inventions, all her careful control of life and matter, she had never truly understood that the greatest act of creation was not to build, but to let go. The wind circled her once more. "When you open your eyes," it said softly, "the world will not be what it was. It will be smaller perhaps, humbler, but alive. It will need your kindness more than your knowledge." "And you?" she asked. "Will you still be there?" The wind hesitated, then laughed, a sound like distant chimes in spring.
"I am everywhere."
"Wherever someone breathes, I will be." She lifted her face to the rising dawn. Light spilled across the horizon, scattering motes of gold that danced around her. Every part of her being felt the pull, the invitation to wake. Yet there was no rush, no urgency.
Only the calm rhythm of inevitable becoming. She whispered to the world, to herself.
To the wind that remembered everything. Then let it be morning. And somewhere far away, in the waking realm of stillness and stone, her eyelids fluttered. The faint hum of her machines reached a crescendo and then softened, as though bowing to her will. Her first breath was quiet, measured, but filled with infinite weight. When she opened her eyes, the magenta light spilled outward, touching every corner of the kingdom. The candy towers shimmered. The syrup rivers gleamed. The citizens, once made of memory, became flesh and laughter again. The sound of life, soft footsteps, curious whispers, joyful gasps, filled the air. The sleeping kingdom had awakened. Princess Bubblegum rose slowly from her throne, her robes trailing light like liquid dawn. She looked around, her eyes both ancient and new. Everything was familiar, yet different, as though time had folded upon itself and begun again. Outside, the wind moved through the streets, invisible but present, weaving between the reborn citizens. It carried scents of sugar and morning dew, of beginnings and blessings. When it brushed against her cheek, she smiled and whispered, "Thank you." The wind did not reply in words, but in feeling, a warmth that filled her chest, reminding her that love, once kindled, never vanishes. From the highest tower she gazed out upon her kingdom. The stars were fading into daylight. The world was smaller now, finite, fragile, but she would not trade it for eternity. For what is sweetness without the knowledge it might someday fade? She placed her hand upon the balcony railing, feeling the soft breeze curl around her fingers. "Finn," she murmured, "your dream lives."
And so do I. The wind swirled once more, rising high above the towers before dispersing into the warming air. And somewhere,
in that endless space where dreams touch the edges of reality, a boy's laughter echoed faintly, bright, brave, eternal. Thus begins the morning of the world reborn. Morning returned like a shy guest who had been gone too long. Pause. The light that touched the Candy Kingdom was not harsh, but soft, diffused through sugar crystal air, gliding down rooftops and rippling across syrup canals. It had the warmth of forgiveness. It had the scent of renewal. The world was, once again, awake. Princess Bubblegum stood upon the balcony of her castle, her bare feet pressing against the cold stone. She could feel the faint hum beneath her, the pulse of the machine she had built long ago, now stirring like old friends beneath the earth. The sky was still pale, a new canvas untouched by clouds. She inhaled deeply, her first true breath in an age that had forgotten her name. The air was cool and alive, full of scents she hadn't known she'd missed: melted sugar, dew on licorice grass, the faint electric tingle of reactivated life. For a long moment, she said nothing. Words felt unnecessary. The silence itself was full, pregnant with meaning, patient as the sea before a storm of creation. Below her, the citizens of the kingdom stirred, rubbing their eyes, stretching, testing their newfound limbs as though waking from the same eternal slumber. Peppermint Butler blinked up toward the balcony. His round eyes, once faded to pale blue, were now bright and sharp again. "Princess," he called softly, as though afraid his voice might shatter the fragile peace. She smiled faintly, and the act itself felt like a rediscovered art. "Good morning."
"Peppermint," she whispered. He bowed deeply, trembling. "You've returned."
"The whole kingdom. It's alive again?" "Yes," she said, her voice a gentle melody carried by the wind. "And so am I." For the first time since her awakening, she allowed herself to feel the full gravity of what she had done, what they had done. Her dream had been eternal, a perfect preservation of everything she had built, but perfection had come at the cost of pulse. Now, as life surged once more through her creations, she understood. To exist in time was to exist in wonder. Every second mattered again. Every moment was a small eternity. She descended from the balcony, her steps light, her robe trailing behind her like mist. As she entered the heart of the castle, the corridors seemed narrower, more intimate. Dust had settled in small corners. Vines had cracked through the marble. Imperfections that once would have pained her now filled her with warmth. She walked through the great hall where portraits of candy ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes shimmering faintly in the renewed light. They seemed to watch her with approval, or perhaps curiosity. The world they had left had slept too long. At the far end of the hall, the ancient clock, one she had built herself, whose gears had ceased turning when the dream began, now ticked once again. Each sound was a heartbeat, a promise that time had returned. She paused beside it and rested her hand on its side. "Welcome back," she whispered to it, as though greeting an old companion. The clock answered in the only language it knew, a steady, patient rhythm. Outside, laughter began to rise from the streets. The citizens were rediscovering their voices. She heard the clatter of carts, the splash of syrup in the fountains, the buzz of conversations filled with awe and confusion. Someone began to play a flute. The melody simple, unsteady, yet so alive that her eyes welled with tears. The wind drifted through the open windows, swirling around her. Though it no longer spoke, she could feel its quiet approval. As the morning deepened, she stepped outside into the square. The crowd gathered almost immediately. Hundreds of candy people with faces bright as sunrise. Some knelt, others wept, a few simply stared in silence. They were not worshipping her, she realized. They were remembering her. "Princess," a small gumdrop child whispered, clutching his mother's hand. "Are we going to be okay now?" Bubblegum knelt, meeting his wide eyes.
Yes, she said softly.
But it won't always be easy. We'll have to rebuild together. We'll learn again what it means to live. The child blinked. Will it hurt? She smiled, her heart trembling. Sometimes, but that's how we know we're real. Her words rippled through the crowd like sunlight through glass. And as they listened, they seemed to stand taller, breathe deeper. The Candy Kingdom was no longer a monument to eternity. It was a living thing again, fragile and beautiful. For the first time since she had become more than mortal, Princess Bubblegum felt small when it was wonderful. Hours passed gently. She walked through the streets, greeting her people. Some of her old inventions lay dormant or half-broken, covered in ivy and candy floss. She touched them fondly, whispering to the mechanisms as though they were sleeping creatures. One by one they stirred, not out of command, but out of companionship. The machines remembered her. The entire kingdom remembered. And as she moved among them, she felt an unfamiliar lightness, as though she had shed the crown of perfection and now wore something simpler, freer. She was no longer a ruler guarding eternity. She was a friend walking through the dawn of time. As the sun climbed higher, she reached the edge of the kingdom, where the land dissolved into the sugar plains. The wind carried faint echoes of the outer world, the rustle of unseen forests, the murmurs of forgotten rivers. She gazed into the distance, where the horizon shimmered. Beyond that shimmer she felt it, the memory of him, Finn. He had not returned, of course. The Finn she remembered lived in another age, another dream. Yet his presence still lingered, like the aftertaste of laughter, or the warmth left by a vanished flame. She knelt and placed her hand upon the ground. The sugar soil pulsed faintly beneath her touch, responding to her thought. "You never stopped believing," she murmured. "Even when I did." For a moment the air shimmered.
A faint glimmer formed beside her. Not a ghost, not a shadow, but an impression, like a memory shaped by light.
A boy's outline stood there, half transparent, smiling. His hat fluttered, though there was no wind. She did not speak. She simply smiled back, her eyes full of gratitude, and as the image faded, the air filled with warmth. The scent of pine and sunlight followed, echoes of adventures long gone, yet somehow eternal. That night, as twilight returned, she stood once more upon her balcony. The stars glimmered faintly in the purple sky, and the world below hummed with life. The laughter of her people drifted upward, blending with the slow rhythm of the rivers. The kingdom no longer slept, but dreamed awake, its collective breath rising and falling like waves against the shore of reality. She looked up at the stars and wondered if somewhere, beyond their glow, Finn and Jake existed still, in some other dream, some other branch of time. Perhaps, she thought, they were watching, or maybe dreaming her in return. In that moment, she understood something profound. No story ever truly ends. It changes form. It moves from one dreamer to another, carried like a seed across eternity. Her own story of perfection and loss, of stillness and renewal, had only ever been a verse in a larger song. Finn's bravery, Jake's laughter, her science, her love, all notes within one timeless melody. And the melody continued. The night deepened. The stars drew closer. She leaned against the railing, her heartbeat steady.
"The morning after forever," she whispered. "And it's beautiful." She closed her eyes. Images drifted before her, the field of light from her dream, the face of the boy who had once saved her, the kingdom shimmering like a living heart. She felt no need to preserve it anymore.
No need to control it. The beauty lay in the impermanence. The sweetness was in the fading. The wind passed over her shoulders once more, cool and kind. She did not ask it to speak. It did not need to. It was enough to feel it move, a reminder that life, once set in motion, never truly stops. As dawn approached again, the first light of the new day crept across the towers. The pink glow touched her skin, warm and gentle. The citizens began to stir, greeting another sunrise with songs and laughter. Princess Bubblegum turned toward the horizon, her eyes filled with quiet wonder. "The dream continues," she whispered, "but now we're all awake." And the wind carried her words beyond the kingdom, over the plains, through forgotten forests, and out into the wide,
unending world where perhaps, somewhere,
a boy and his dog still journeyed, still laughed, still believed in the goodness of things. The morning after forever had come, and with it a new kind of peace. One not made of perfection, but of breath and warmth and the promise of change. The moon rose over the Candy Kingdom like a watchful guardian, silver and serene. Oz. The night was clear, and the stars burned softly, not in the harsh brilliance of ancient times, but with a calm, steady glow. The world had learned to breathe again, and now it exhaled gently into the cool air of evening. Princess Bubblegum sat beside one of the sugar fountains, her reflection rippling in the luminous syrup. The castle lights shimmered behind her, and the quiet laughter of her people echoed faintly in the distance. The kingdom was alive, fragile, imperfect, and beautiful. But as the night deepened, she felt another presence stirring in the stillness. Not one of her people, but something older. It came like a memory surfacing from a long-forgotten dream, slow and deliberate. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of pine and distant rain. Her breath caught. She knew that scent. Finn. For a long moment, she did not move. She simply closed her eyes and let the memory unfold around her like a soft cloak. She saw the boy again, not as a ghost or illusion, but in her mind, vivid and alive. His laughter, wild and bright, his determination sharper than any sword. The courage that had once refused to fade, even in the face of despair. She whispered his name. Finn, and the sound of it rippled through the night like a secret prayer. The wind answered with silence, yet the silence itself was full of meaning. She remembered the last day she saw him, the golden hour of their final battle, the horizon lit with flame and courage. How young he had been, and yet how old his eyes looked when he turned to face what no one else could. He had saved her then, yes, but more than that, he had reminded her of something she had forgotten, that love, unmeasured by control, was stronger than perfection, and now, in this reborn kingdom, his presence lingered like a soft echo, not haunting, comforting. As she gazed into the syrup fountain, the ripples began to shimmer, forming faint shapes of light. For a moment, it was as if the water remembered too. The image of a boy and a dog walking beneath a vast sky, their laughter carried on unseen winds. She smiled faintly. "You're still out there, aren't you?" she whispered, somewhere in the folds of the dream. "You never really left." The water shimmered brighter, and for a fleeting instant she thought she saw his reflection smiling back. Not a ghost, not sorrow, just presence, and she knew then that heroes never truly vanish. They dissolve into the stories that remember them. She rose and began to walk through the gardens, where the night flowers bloomed in shades of lavender and soft gold. Their petals swayed as she passed, releasing sweet fragrances into the air. The pathways lined with peppermint stones gleamed beneath the moonlight. With each step, the memories grew clearer, not just of Finn, but of all who had once shaped the rhythm of the world. Jake, with his calm laughter and boundless wisdom hidden beneath play. Marceline, whose songs had woven sorrow and joy into one seamless melody. BMO, who dreamed of love through circuits and stars. Each memory was a pulse, a flicker of something beyond time. They had lived, they had changed, they had vanished into legend. Yet in this moment she could feel them all, as though the fabric of the world still hummed with their energy. She paused before a small hill overlooking the kingdom. From here the towers rose like candles in the night, glowing with gentle luminescence. The air shimmered faintly with dreamlight, the residue of her old enchantments still drifting like mist above the rooftops. For centuries she had tried to preserve everything, to keep memory from fading. But now she understood. Memory was not meant to be frozen. It was meant to move, to change, to breathe. She knelt, gathering a handful of sugar grass between her fingers, watching it glint beneath the moon. To remember, she murmured, is not to trap the past, but to let it live within the present. And as she spoke, the wind moved again, whispering faintly through the candy leaves. It carried a rhythm gentle and steady like footsteps. She listened one step, then another. Her heart quickened. In the quiet distance, she thought she saw a flicker of light. Faint, then growing stronger. It danced between the trees, flickering gold and white, moving as if alive. She walked toward it slowly, the air thick with memory. Each step forward seemed to bridge centuries, the line between dream and waking blurring until both worlds felt like one. When she reached the edge of the forest, the light took shape. It was not Finn himself, but a manifestation, an echo formed by the collective memory of the world. A boy's silhouette, glowing softly, his hat slightly askew, his posture familiar. He turned, as if sensing her. The eyes were made of light, but in them she saw recognition. "Finn," she breathed, her voice trembling like the first note of a lullaby. The figure smiled. "Hey, PB!" The words were not spoken aloud, but they vibrated within her heart. She stepped closer.
"Is it really you?"
He shook his head lightly, the gesture playful even now. "I'm what's left of the story," he said, "the part that still remembers you." She felt tears forming.
"You saved me once," his voice softened.
We saved each other. The light around him flickered, and with each pulse, memories unfolded. Flashes of battles fought together, laughter shared, long talks beneath shattered stars. The world they once knew was gone, but the connection between them remained, spanning all the distances that time had tried to impose. "Why have you come?" she asked. The light shimmered. "Because memory is alive," he said. "Every time someone believes in kindness, in hope, every time you look toward the morning, we exist again." She nodded slowly, her heart full. "You're part of the kingdom still," he smiled faintly.
"I'm part of every kingdom."
"Every dream that dares to wake." The wind stirred, carrying a soft hum through the forest. It was Jake's laughter now, distant, rolling like warm thunder, and Marceline's song faint but haunting. The echoes of all their voices wove together, creating a melody that hung in the air like light made audible. Bubblegum listened with her eyes closed, her heartbeat sinking to the rhythm.
"You're all still here," she whispered. "Not gone, just transformed." "Yeah," Finn said gently. "That's the thing about stories, and they don't die."
They wait, they sleep, and when the world's ready, they wake up again. The moonlight brightened, wrapping the two of them in a gentle glow. She reached out, her hand hovering near his. For a moment they touched, not in flesh, but in light, like two harmonies meeting. In that contact, she felt everything, the laughter, the battles, the goodbyes, the love, and then, as softly as he had appeared, he began to fade. "Goodbye, Finn," she whispered. But he shook his head. "Not goodbye. Just good night." When the light vanished, the forest grew still again. The stars shimmered above, the air humming with quiet peace. She stood there for a long time, letting the moment sink deep into her being. Heroes, she realized, never sought immortality. They found it in the hearts that remembered them, and she was one of those hearts. As she returned to the castle, the night sky seemed closer, the stars larger. The whole world pulsed with quiet rhythm, as though the universe itself had begun to dream again. Back within the throne room, she lit a single candle beside her bed. Its flame wavered, golden and soft. She sat beside it and whispered, "To the heroes who wake within the dream." The flame flickered once, as if in response. She smiled, closed her eyes, and rested her head against the pillow. The scent of pines still lingered faintly in the air. Somewhere, she imagined, a boy and his dog were walking toward another sunrise,
laughing. And though they would never meet again,
their stories would always touch, in the gentle folds of memory, in the calm breath of a sleeping world. The kingdom slept peacefully, but it was no longer the sleep of forgetting. It was the sleep of dreaming, full of life, full of warmth, full of echoes that would never fade, and outside, the stars continued to hum the memory of heroes. The moon over hung low and tender that night, a silver eye closing for the last time. The wind whispered through the hollow towers of what had once been the Candy Kingdom, its voice thin, like memory, stretching into dream. The fields shimmered faintly beneath that lunar hush, the grass reflecting not light, but the soft ache of remembrance. Finn stood before a door. It was not made of wood, nor stone, nor sugar, but of light and shadow, both breathing in rhythm like the chest of a sleeping god. He had wandered far to find it, through kingdoms that had forgotten their laughter, through forests of crystallized air, through rivers where fish spoke in the tongues of the past. Jake was beside him, though fainter now, his form trembling at the edges like a reflection in rippled glass. Time, which had once bent cheerfully around them, seemed now to hesitate, caught in reverence for what was about to end. "Buddy," Jake murmured, his voice gentle. "We really made it, huh?" Finn nodded, his eyes calm. "Yeah, I think this is it. The end of the story."
Or maybe just another door. They looked up together at that living threshold, that quiet veil between the known and whatever waited beyond.
What was the air tasted of sweetness and dust. Somewhere deep in the distance, the last echoes of Bubblegum's machines hummed like lullabies, the remnants of her science, still calculating the structure of eternity. But there was no one left to listen. The candy towers had melted into translucent rivers of glass. What was once pink and playful had become a kingdom of coral fossils, each spire still faintly glowing with the warmth of old laughter. Finn thought of her then, the princess he had once tried to save. The one he hadn't, in this version of the tale. Without him, she had grown older, faster. Responsibility had devoured her light. The Candy People, fragile and loyal, had needed her to stay strong long after she had forgotten how. When her creations turned against her, when the weight of immortality had settled on her heart like ice, no one had been there to lift it. She wanted to keep everyone safe, Finn whispered. Even from time, Jake sighed.
That's the thing, man.
You can't keep forever safe. Forever doesn't want to be kept. The door before them pulsed once, slow and rhythmic, as though agreeing. Finn brushed a hand across its surface. It was neither warm nor cold, but alive, a vibration that felt like remembering everything at once. His reflection swam across it, not of a boy, but of every age he'd ever been. 1,000 versions of Finn, each with different scars, different smiles, different endings, all watching him silently. One version, younger, braver, foolishly kind, smiled and raised a hand. Finn returned the gesture, a small laugh catching in his throat. "Hey," he said softly. "Thanks for getting me here." Behind the door, something vast shifted, not a sound but a feeling, as though the world were drawing a deep, patient breath. Jake sat down on the grass. "You ever wonder," he said, eyes closing, "what would have happened if you had saved her?" Finn smiled faintly, all the time, and as if answering him, the wind carried a vision, thin, fragile, like a dream born from forgotten ink. He saw the world that could have been, bubblegum alive and laughing, her kingdom bright and safe.
Finn, her loyal hero, standing beside her.
The adventures unending, the sky always full of song. But there was something hollow there too, a sameness that never ended, a peace that never learned how to grow. The eternal loop of happiness, untouched by loss, unshaped by change. It was beautiful, and it was empty. Finn blinked, and the image melted like sugar in rain. Jake opened one eye, watching him.
"Not much of a story, huh?" "No," Finn said quietly. "It's
just a dream that never wakes up." As the night deepened, the stars seemed to move closer, drawn to this place, to this ending. They gathered like spectators in silence, their light trembling on the horizon. Finn felt them watching, each one a memory, each one a version of himself scattered across possible worlds. He turned to Jake. "You think we're done being heroes?" Jake chuckled, a low, warm sound. "Heroes, buds, dreamers, noodles, call it what you want. We're just stories, man. We do what stories do. We end, and maybe we start again somewhere else." Finn nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe every ending is just us turning into someone's bedtime story." Jake grinned. "Then we better make it a good one." The stars pulsed once more, a slow, sympathetic heartbeat. Beyond the door, a light began to bloom. Not bright, not harsh, but soft, golden, like dawn seen through tears. It wasn't calling them. It was waiting. Finn stepped closer, feeling the hum of it through his chest. "What do you think's on the other side?" Jake tilted his head. "Maybe everyone we lost. Maybe nobody. Maybe just peace." The thought hung there, fragrant as honey. "Or maybe," Finn whispered, "it's her, the princess, waiting to be saved after all this time." Jake looked at him with that familiar half-smile. "Wouldn't surprise me, bro. You always find a way to save someone, even if it's yourself." Finn laughed softly,
eyes bright with both sorrow and wonder. He touched the door again.
And this time it opened. There was no creak.
No thunder. Only a sigh like a candle remembering its flame.
Light spilled gently into the meadow, carrying scents of places he had never been. Rain on quartz, bread baking in distant kitchens, the salt of faraway seas. The breeze that followed tasted of time forgotten and forgiven. Jake stood and stretched. "Guess this is it, huh?" Finn nodded.
"Yeah, but I'm not afraid." "Good," Jake said, looping an arm round him.
"Then let's go see what forever looks like." They stepped forward together, their shadows folding into the light until the meadow was empty once more. Only the grass moved, whispering their names to the wind, but the world of Ooh did not die. It dreamed. From the ruins of the Candy Kingdom, new blossoms sprouted, crystal flowers glowing faintly in the moonlight. The air shimmered with faint melodies, echoes of songs sung long ago. The machines that Bubblegum had built began to hum again, not to calculate or command, but to remember. Marceline's old guitar, left in a tower of dust, played a note on its own, a low, soft vibration that spread like ripples through time. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, the Fire Kingdom stirred, its embers sighing back to life. Life, it seemed, was not ending. It was simply changing its shape. The door that Finn and Jake had walked through remained open, a gentle crack of light in the heart of Ooo. Through it, whispers moved like falling snow. Dreams crossed back and forth. Not heroes, not monsters, just stories finding new homes. A child, centuries later, would wander near that door. She would see it shimmer, hear the faint laughter of two friends echoing from within. She would sit there for hours, tracing her fingers through the grass, imagining what adventures had come before, and when she finally rose to leave, she would carry a strange feeling in her chest, a kind of peace, a quiet understanding that everything, no matter how far it travels, eventually finds its way home. The door would remain, waiting, breathing, dreaming. As dawn came, light spilled across the land. The sky was full of gold and soft rose. For a moment, everything seemed new again. The broken, the lost, the forgotten, all were painted with a tender hue, as if forgiven by the morning itself. Finn's sword, left behind near the door, caught the sunlight and gleamed one last time. Then it faded, not as something ending, but as something becoming. And in that stillness, you could almost hear them, Finn and Jake, somewhere beyond the veil, laughing, running, adventuring again in some brighter dream. Their voices faded into eternity, leaving behind only the sound of wind and heartbeats. The story had ended, and yet it hadn't. The door pulsed once more, then stilled. All of Ooo rested beneath the kind sky, and somewhere, perhaps in another world, another storyteller leaned close and whispered to a sleeping child. There was once a boy with a sword and a dog made of magic.
And though he didn't save the princess this time, he saved something greater. The story itself. The child smiled in her sleep.
The stars outside glowed softly. The dream continued, and the world, forever and ever, exhaled.